Welcome back for Module 2 of the CoC 101 training series. This module will cover the makeup of a CoC and your CoC basics. So what is a CoC? What is a continuum of care? So a lot of people think of a CoC as a funding stream, which is the funds used that communities receive to address homelessness. And that is true. That's the continuum of care program, which funds different resources for folks experiencing homelessness, which we talked about in the previous module. However, CoC actually refers to a larger concept than just funding. So the CoC is a group of organizations and individuals who are working together in their community. So the CoC is really an entity. And the CoC promotes a community-wide commitment to the goal of ending homelessness. It does provide funding for efforts to quickly house folks experiencing homelessness and minimize the trauma and dislocation caused by homelessness. The CoC works together to promote access to an effective use of mainstream programs, so collaborating with other resources, and with the goal of optimizing self-sufficiency for folks experiencing homelessness. So a simple definition from HUD is that a continuum of care is established by representatives of relevant organizations, so folks in your community who address homelessness, within a certain geographic area. In our case, it's the Western PA CoC, to carry out the responsibilities set forth in the CoC program interim rule. So that's pretty jargony. We're going to break that down and talk about who are these representatives, what is our geographic area, and also what are the responsibilities. So who are the participants of a CoC? The HUD really expects communities to bring in a broad range of stakeholders to participate in the continuum of care. Not only does that include homeless assistance provider, but it includes all these other folks listed on this slide. So advocates, businesses, schools, mental health agencies, hospitals, housing developers, law enforcement. One I'll emphasize specifically is homeless and formerly homeless individuals. There's really an emphasis that your continuum of care is elevating and centering the voices of folks with lived experience in helping drive your community strategy to address homelessness. So ideally, a CoC is represented by all of these different folks. So the Western Pennsylvania CoC is made up of 20 counties, which you can see here in green. The dark green counties are the Northwest RAB, which we'll talk about in a bit, and the light green are the Southwest RAB. So each continuum of care has a specific geography that they serve. So the Western PA CoC is home to over 1.7 million Pennsylvanians. It's a very large CoC. It covers over 15,000 square miles, includes 720 municipalities, 122 school districts. So we're talking about a pretty large continuum of care. Some continuums of care are small, maybe they're a single county, or even sometimes a single city, or multiple counties. But the Western Pennsylvania CoC is what's often known as a balance of state CoC, where it's covering a vast majority of the geography of a state. We also have the Eastern Pennsylvania continuum of care, which covers 33 counties in the eastern part of the state. And then there's a couple of other CoCs in Pennsylvania that cover a single county. So the Western Pennsylvania continuum of care is largely rural. 74% of all municipalities has less than 2,500 residents. And we're talking about an area that has over 15,000 farms and 2 million acres of farmland. So we have a large CoC geography. So CoCs are required to host meetings for the continuum of care membership at least twice annually. So the Western PA CoC holds meetings twice a year in April and October. And anyone who's interested in addressing homelessness within the community can join the continuum of care. It's really as easy as filling out a simple form through the CoC website to say, hey, I would like to be a part of this. If you're interested in participating as part of the CoC, we would highly encourage you to join as a member. You can attend CoC meetings, get informed about trainings and different things that are happening. And the CoC does solicit new members at least once annually, but members can join at any time. The CoC also hosts various trainings throughout the year, both for CoC grantees, which are those folks who get CoC money, as well as just the general membership. So I've mentioned the term RAB a couple times. RAB stands for Regional Homeless Advisory Board. So in the Western PA CoC, we have two RABs. We have the Northwest RAB and we have the Southwest RAB. And the Northwest RAB represents 13 counties in the northern part of the CoC, and the Southwest RAB has 7 counties in the more southern part of the CoC. And each RAB is responsible for sort of putting into practice the policies adopted by the CoC, and then really working with their community to address and end homelessness locally. Folks are going to know their community needs better than, folks who may kind of more have a general understanding. You know what's going on in your community, you know what the needs are, and the RAB is sort of the mechanism by which you can participate actively in the CoC beyond those 2 annual CoC meetings. So we mentioned the CoC program interim rule. This is the HUD regulations that really cover how a CoC operates. So it focuses on the regulatory implementation of the CoC program. So CoC has a number of different responsibilities to their community, and we'll talk more about what are those responsibilities. What is a CoC supposed to be doing? And CoC recipients and subrecipients, meaning anyone who gets CoC funding, must follow the regulations in the CoC program interim rule. So the CoC responsibilities. So first of all, you have to operate the CoC. So you have to hold those meetings twice a year for your CoC membership. The CoC needs to make an invitation for new members to join annually. The CoC must have a board, a governing board, and must follow a written process to select that board to act on behalf of the continuum of care. And the board is really charged with overseeing the implementation of the continuum of care and guiding a lot of the strategy and work. And then the CoC also often appoints committees, subcommittees, or work groups to move forward the work of the CoC. The CoC must have a governance charter. The governance charter really is a document that establishes the functions of the CoC board, the CoC committees, what is their structure, what is their role, the HMIS lead, which is each continuum of care appoints an HMIS lead agency. In our case, it's DCED. And the governance charter outlines what their role is. The role of CoC staff. So CoCs is a lot of work to implement, and generally most CoCs have paid staff who are working to address homelessness in their community and kind of facilitate all these different functions. And then it must also talk about the process for amending the charter. So the governance charter should sort of be a living document that's updated regularly with any changes happening in the CoC. Other responsibilities of the CoC is you must have written standards, meaning written policies and procedures for both CoC and ESG assistance. So the Western Pennsylvania CoC has written standards for how CoC and ESG funded programs have to operate. And even if a program doesn't receive CoC or ESG funding, we encourage folks to review and follow the written standards so that we can sort of have a consistent approach to services across the entire CoC. CoCs have to evaluate performance. So for anyone who's receiving CoC funds, the CoC has to establish performance targets for them, monitor their performance, and also report outcomes to HUD, and making sure we're really funding effective programs. The CoC has to establish a coordinated entry system. And the goal of the coordinated entry system is that you have a streamlined process that ensures that all people experiencing homelessness or a housing crisis have fair and equal access to services within the CoC, and that you have a system that can quickly identify, assess, refer, and connect those folks to housing. We'll talk more about coordinated entry in a future module. The CoC must design and operate the HMIS system, and HMIS stands for Homeless Management Information System. This is the database used by homeless service providers within the CoC. So the CoC has to establish an HMIS lead agency, and in the Western Pennsylvania CoC, DCED is that HMIS lead agency. COCs must plan and conduct the point-in-time count, which we talked about previously. It's a count on a single night in January of all the folks experiencing homelessness in your community, and this is a HUD requirement. And then there's other planning responsibilities, coordinating with consolidated plan jurisdictions. So there are certain communities that may get money directly from HUD rather than going through the CoC or the state ESG recipient. So we're supposed to be coordinating with those communities, coordinating with folks who get ESG money, and then also establishing a community plan, a strategy for how we're going to deliver homeless assistance. The CoC is also responsible for applying for HUD funding annually. So CoC funding renews every year. So every year you have the chance to both renew existing projects and go for new projects. And this process is called the CoC NOFA. NOFA standing for Notice of Funding Availability. So within that annual process, the CoC has to establish priorities for funding projects, both new and existing. In addition to kind of deciding which projects you want to fund, the collaborative applicant, which is the entity that's kind of responsible for doing all this, has to collect and combine required information from all these projects that have been selected for funding and submit that information to HUD. The CoC, the collaborative applicant, also applies for CoC planning activities. So for context, DCD is the collaborative applicant for CoC, but Diana T. Myers and Associates, which is the consultant for the CoC, often is doing a lot of this on the ground work to help move these processes forward. So that's the end of Module 2. We'll see you back for Module 3.